Hello, I'm Gavin Hoey and you're watching the Technique of the Month from Digital Photo Magazine. Well, this month I'm going to show you my #1 all-time unquestioned favourite painterly effect using Photoshop elements. So I've got an image on screen, but part of the reason I really like this technique is because it works with so many different images, and with a bit of luck what we're going to end up with is a picture that looks something like that. Now, it might look like that's quite complicated to make, but the real beauty of this technique is it's remarkably straightforward and only uses 2 filters. So let's come out of that and go back to the original image. Now we are going to be using layers quite a bit for this tutorial, so if you can't see layers, you'll need to see them. Go to Window and down to Layers. And there we go. And at the moment you can see I have a single layer and it's called Background. But for this technique we need a total of 3 layers. So let's come up to Layer, choose Duplicate Layer and click OK. So now we have 2, but we need 3, so back to Layer once more, Duplicate Layer and click OK. So there we are, we now have 3 layers, top, middle and bottom. Now we're working on the top layer at the moment and we can tell that because it's darker than the other layers, so this is the active layer. And let's start off by putting a filter onto that layer. So come up to Filter, down to Artistic and choose Cutout. Now Cutout is a great little filter. It just takes a second to appear on the preview. Here it is. But what you'll see on the sliders here is there are 3 sliders that control the cutout filter. Number of levels, edge simplicity and edge fidelity. The top one and the bottom one are dead easy. We're going to take the number of levels and shove it all the way to the right hand side, so up to its maximum of 8. And then we're going to take the edge fidelity, that's the bottom one, and take that in the opposite direction, all the way down to the number 1. The middle one is a bit more tricky, and it will vary on your image and the sort of camera you've got, the number of pixels and so on. So I'm going to use edge simplicity, and I know that it's going to work probably around about 6, 7 or 8. And what I'm looking for is this kind of slightly jagged looking effect. And if I change it to 6, 7 or 8, you'll see that the size of those little jagged pieces will vary. Now, there's a little bit of free form here. You can choose whatever size jagged bits you like, but if you go too far, then you'll start to find your image starts to block up quite heavily. So if I come all the way down to, say, 4 or 3, what we're going to end up with is just sort of big brown mush, eventually. Yeah, there you go. So, not so good. So let's go back to number 6, I think looked pretty good, and we'll click OK. So that's going to give our image instantly a slightly sort of painted look, which is really nice. Okay, we've done with the top layer, so we're going to turn off the visibility. That's the small icon, the small eye icon rather, on the left hand side. And we're also going to do the same with the middle layer. We don't need that, we'll get to that later, so we'll click on the eye to make that invisible as well. So we're just going to work on the background layer, but we have to make this the active layer, because at the moment it isn't, but if we click it, it is. So you can now see that's darker than the other layers, that's the active layer. Okay, well it's time for another filter. So back to filter, and this time we're going to apply, let's go for sketch and bas relief. But before I apply the filter, one little thing to check is down here. Got to make sure that your foreground color is black. If it isn't black, just click the small black and white squares like that, and it'll become black, and then we can apply the filter. If you don't, then what will happen is when you apply this filter, rather than it being black and white, it'll be red and white or orange and white or whatever. Okay, so only a couple of sliders to use here, and it's rather less important where these go. So I'm going to bung the detail up to about 12 and the smoothness down to about 4. Pure guesswork, sounds about right to me. I've got an interesting effect going on here. Let's change the light direction just for fun. We'll change it to left and we'll click OK. Now the reason I'm being so vague and woolly about that filter isn't because I want this particular effect. All I want to do is to mess up this layer a little bit using the bas relief to give it a bit of texture. The idea is I'm just going to make this look different to the original image. And if you want to be a bit creative, try different filters rather than bas relief and see what you get. Now we do need this in colour. That's where the layer above came in. So because it's in black and white at the moment, I'm going to make it colour by clicking on the background copy, that's the middle layer, and turning the eye icon back on. and then changing the blend mode from normal, click on the little list, come all the way down nearly to the bottom and choose colour. And you can see we get that bas relief effect, but with a sort of wash of colour that comes from the picture. Okay, we actually have 2 layers here to make that effect, but we really only need 1. In fact, we definitely only need 1. So let's go to layer, we'll come to merge down, and that'll collapse those 2 layers together. Right, we're nearly done. One more filter to do, so back to filter, back to artistic, and one that should be vaguely familiar. We're going to go for cutout again. So we've applied the same filter twice, but I don't really want to put the same settings on. So again, leave number of levels at 8, leave edge fidelity at 1, and just tickle the simplicity a little bit. So let's maybe just try upping it to number 7, and that's just going to give a slightly different sized sort of rectangular and triangular shaped bits and pieces. So when I click OK, we've got that cutout effect on 2 layers, but they're not the same. You see, this is what we're after. We have this image, the bottom layer, and over the top, if I turn the eye back on again, you see we have the original, and they look quite different. So we're going to blend those 2 different layers together using one more blend mode. We're going to go from normal, and this time we're going to choose overlay. Okay, and there you go. That's the effect completed. The really nice thing about this is the way that the whole effect kind of follows the lines of the image coming up here on the tree trunk, and we have this beautiful effect on the leaves. It even looks like there's leaves falling down. It's all very, very nice, and it's all very, very straightforward. So there we go. Apply these effects to your images and see what wonderful painterly effects you can create.